Love history? Subscribe and explore the stories that shaped our world.
Spartacus was born around 103 BC in the rugged lands near the Strymon River in Thrace, which corresponds to modern-day Bulgaria. Historical accounts from the classical era describe him as a man of nomadic stock, likely belonging to the Thracian Mighty tribe, a people known for their fierce independence on the southwestern fringes of Thrace. Before his name became synonymous with rebellion, Spartacus actually fought alongside the very empire he would later seek to destroy, serving his early military career as an auxiliary soldier or mercenary in the Roman legions. Through this service, he gained first-hand knowledge of Roman military discipline, formations, and tactical strategies. However, his life took a drastic turn when he either deserted the military or fought against the Romans, leading to his capture. Stripped of his freedom and humanity, the former soldier was sold into slavery. Because of his imposing physical strength and martial background, he was purchased by Lentulus Batiatus, a wealthy lanista who operated a ludus or gladiator school near the city of Capua in southern Italy. Inside the brutal confines of the ludus, Spartacus was forced into the role of a murmillo, a heavyweight class of gladiator. He was trained to fight for the amusement of the Roman public, armed with a large oblong shield called a scutum and a broad, straight blade, approximately 18 inches long, known as the gladius. Life in the gladiator school was a daily struggle for survival, where men were treated as expendable commodities and trained to kill one another for sport. By 73 BC, the unbearable cruelty of the gladiatorial system pushed Spartacus and his fellow prisoners to their absolute breaking point. The immediate catalyst for their uprising was the grim news of an upcoming festival where the gladiators were scheduled to be offered as purifying sacrifices in the amphitheater for the Roman people. Refusing to die for entertainment, a tight-knit group of approximately 70 to 78 gladiators formulated a desperate escape plan. Although their initial conspiracy was uncovered by the guards, the men refused to surrender. They stormed the school's kitchen, arming themselves with nothing more than iron spits and meat choppers, and fought their way past the heavily armed guards to break out of the compound. Once out on the streets of Capua, fortune favored the escapees. They stumbled upon several wagons transporting professional gladiatorial weapons and armor to another city, which they immediately seized. Now properly armed, the gladiators fought their way through the city gates and retreated to the highly defensible slopes of Mount Vesuvius. The escapees elected Spartacus as their supreme commander, alongside two fierce Gallic gladiators, Crixus and Onemus, who served as his top lieutenants. Initially, the Roman Senate viewed this uprising not as a legitimate war, but as a minor crime wave or a local policing issue. They dispatched the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber with a hastily assembled militia of 3,000 men who were merely randomly gathered citizens rather than disciplined legionaries. Believing the rebels were trapped, Glaber blocked the only known path down the volcano, expecting hunger to force the slaves into a quick surrender. Spartacus, however, demonstrated a stroke of tactical genius that would soon terrify Rome. Utilizing the natural resources of Vesuvius, the rebels harvested wild vines growing on the volcano's slopes and wove them into long, sturdy ropes and ladders. Under the cover of darkness, Spartacus and his men silently rappelled down a sheer, unguarded cliff face, circled around the base of the mountain, and launched a devastating surprise attack on the rear of the unfortified Roman camp. The Roman militia was entirely wiped out, marking the first major victory of the rebellion. The triumph at Mount Vesuvius sent shockwaves throughout the Italian peninsula, transforming a localized prison break into a full-scale servile war. News of the victory drew throngs of oppressed people to Spartacus's banner, including rural slaves, runaway gladiators, impoverished freemen, and rugged shepherds from the countryside. These rural recruits were particularly valuable. Their harsh outdoor lifestyles made them incredibly tough and prepared them well for the rigors of guerrilla warfare, unlike the privileged and softer urban slaves. At its peak, the rebel army swelled to an astonishing force, estimated between 70,000 and 120,000 men, women, and children. It was a remarkably diverse coalition of Celts, Gauls, Thracians, and even disaffected veterans from the recent social war. Spartacus proved to be a brilliant tactician and an inspiring leader, establishing strict discipline and decreeing that all captured loot be divided equally among his followers. Even without formal military training, the slave army displayed remarkable ingenuity, utilizing local materials to forge real weapons and executing highly unconventional tactics that consistently outmaneuvered disciplined Roman forces. Over the following months, the rebels ravaged the fertile regions of southern Italy, sacking towns like Nola, Nuceria, and Metapontum, and easily defeating a second Roman expedition led by the praetor Publius Varinius. By the spring of 72 BC, the Roman Senate finally recognized the existential threat posed by the rebels and dispatched two massive consular armies, totaling around 30,000 to 40,000 men, under the command of Lucius Gellius Publicola and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. During this critical phase, the slave army fractured. For reasons that remain debated, a faction of about 30,000 Gauls and Germans broke away under the command of Crixus. This splinter group was intercepted and utterly destroyed by the Romans near Mount Garganus, where Crixus fought bravely but was ultimately slain. Enraged by the death of his general, Spartacus avenged Crixus by engaging and defeating both consular armies in sequence, capturing their supplies and leaving the Roman legions in total disarray. The rebel army then marched northward, seemingly with a clear path over the Alps to freedom, but inexplicably turned back south to plunder Italy, spreading absolute terror throughout Rome. Alarmed by the continuous and humiliating defeats of their highest magistrates, the Roman Senate drastically escalated their response in 71 BC. They handed ultimate command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome and a seasoned veteran who was the only politician willing to volunteer for the dangerous position. Crassus was granted an overwhelming force of 8 legions, comprising upwards of 40,000 to 50,000 heavily armed and professionally trained Roman soldiers. Crassus immediately recognized that the fear of Spartacus had deeply infected the Roman military. When his legate Mummius disobeyed orders, engaged the rebels prematurely, and suffered a humiliating defeat, Crassus responded with terrifying brutality to restore discipline. He revived the ancient extreme punishment of decimation. The surviving soldiers of the routed cohorts were divided into groups of 10 and forced to draw lots. The loser in each group was beaten to death by his 9 comrades. This gruesome act sent a clear message to the legions. They must fear their commander more than they feared the enemy. With his newly disciplined war machine, Crassus aggressively pushed Spartacus southward, eventually cornering the slave army at Rhegium, on the very tip of the Italian peninsula. Desperate for a way out, Spartacus struck a deal with a fleet of Cilician pirates, paying them a fortune to transport his army across the strait to Sicily, where he hoped to incite another slave rebellion and gather fresh reinforcements. However, the pirates betrayed him, taking the rebel gold and sailing away, abandoning the slaves on the coast. Seizing this opportunity, Crassus ordered his legions to construct a massive fortification, a trench and a wall spanning nearly 55 kilometers across the isthmus, effectively trapping the rebel army and cutting them off from all food and supplies. Facing slow starvation, Spartacus waited for a fierce winter storm. Under the cover of darkness and harsh weather, the rebels filled the trench with earth, branches, and the bodies of the dead, violently breaking through the Roman siege lines and escaping back into the Italian countryside. Although Spartacus had broken through the blockade, his army was exhausted and their strategic position was rapidly deteriorating. The Roman Senate, unwilling to leave anything to chance, ordered the legendary general Pompey to march his legions south from Spain, while another commander, Lucullus, landed forces at Brundisium, cutting off the rebels' escape routes. Crassus, deeply afraid that Pompey would arrive and steal the glory for ending the war, relentlessly pursued Spartacus, forcing the slave army into a final, decisive confrontation near the headwaters of the Silarus River in 71 BC. Knowing that this would be their final stand, Spartacus prepared his men for a fight to the death. Before the battle began, his war horse was brought to him. In a dramatic display of ultimate commitment, Spartacus drew his sword and killed the animal in front of his troops. He loudly declared that if they won the day, he would have his pick of many fine Roman horses, but if they lost, he would have no need for one. The Battle of the Silarus River was fiercely contested and exceptionally bloody. Spartacus led from the front, cutting through the Roman ranks in a desperate bid to reach Crassus and end the war with a single stroke. He managed to kill 2 Roman centurions who stood in his path, but could not break through to the commander. During the melee, Spartacus was struck in the thigh by a Roman javelin. Grievously wounded, he dropped to one knee, holding his heavy shield forward, and continued to fight off attackers until he was completely surrounded and hacked to death. The rebel army was utterly annihilated, and Spartacus's body was lost in the chaotic aftermath, never to be found. The vengeance of the Roman Republic was swift and unimaginably cruel. Crassus captured 6,000 survivors of the rebel army and condemned them to the most brutal and degrading execution known to the ancient world: crucifixion. Heavy iron nails, approximately 18 centimeters long, were driven through the victims' hands and heel bones, securing them to heavy wooden crosses. The 6,000 crosses were erected along the Appian Way, stretching over 100 miles from Capua all the way to the gates of Rome. The agonizing screams of the dying echoed for days as they slowly succumbed to asphyxiation, shock, and the elements. The decaying bodies were left hanging for years, a horrific monument designed to instill absolute terror into anyone who might dream of defying the empire. Yet, despite this gruesome end, Spartacus achieved a legendary immortality. The Thracian gladiator who terrified the greatest power of the ancient world became an eternal symbol of defiance, resistance, and the universal human struggle for freedom.